Welcome back to our listeners and viewers of the Responsible Edge podcast, brought to you by the Anti-Greenwash Charter. And today I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Gina Camfield, Head of ESG at Aramark UK. In this episode, we're talking food, carbon, and the gap between what consumers say and what they actually do, sparked by a new study on carbon-labelled sandwiches. What can it teach us about changing behaviour, scaling global carbon choices, and making sustainability stick? Gina, it's an absolute delight to have you on the show this morning. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Charlie, for inviting me. I can't wait to get stuck into this conversation.
Fantastic. Now, Gina, we have got sort of 20 minutes or so to introduce those of our listeners and viewers who aren't aware of you and your work, to kind of give a bit of a background and to sort of talk them through your story to date. And obviously, we're very fortunate on the Responsible Edge that we do get to ask those questions about, those formative experiences of, right and wrong, of awareness of ethics, of, understanding of nature and of sustainability and of environmental experiences. So take us back to wherever you'd like to start. I know that there's a particularly interesting theme that goes through your early part of your life as well that I'm really keen to kind of tuck into. But just give our viewers and our listeners that aren't aware of you a bit of a journey through your life so far.
Yeah, of course. So I grew up in a sporting environment. Sport has always played such a key part in my life. And you're probably thinking, how on earth is this going to tie to sustainability? But if I'm honest, it's really laid the foundations for just my career pathway outside of sport, which I never thought that I'd have, if I'm honest with you. So yeah, I grew up playing football. It was a huge part of my life from a really young age, around the age of 5. I came through academy systems, which at the time was probably a bit of an unusual path for girls. At the age of 10, I remember turning around to my mum and saying, I want to be in a football academy. And I was extremely lucky in the fact that she said, if that's what you want to do, then that's what you will do. And so football just became such a big part of my life, probably from around the age of 10.
And Gina, sorry, just to jump in there, why is that such a sort of a unique path to follow? Is it just girls just not getting the opportunities to be in football academies?
Yeah, back then, women's football wasn't as visible at all or supported as much as it is today. We're going back 22 years now, which doesn't sound like a long time in the grand scheme of life. However, in terms of how quickly the women's football game has evolved, it's really only in the last sort of 5 years that we've seen so much attention, focus, media on it. 20 years ago, it was always an expectation that you'd have a career alongside playing, even at the elite level. So even your Arsenals, your Chelseas, the best players in the UK were working a full-time job, perhaps as a post lady in the morning and then going off to play football or train in the afternoon. So it was never a career as a standalone on its own, or it was very, very rare. You had to be in that top 1%, and I certainly wasn't in that. So yeah, it was probably a little bit, it was very surprising for a lot of my friends back then, of leaving school at the age of 16 to go and being in a football academy, moving 3 hours away from home to go and live in Bristol, and choosing to be part of their setup, getting to play under Mark Sampson, who then went on to be the England manager. It was an amazing time in my life because all I knew was playing football and going to do my studies.
And let me just pick up on, Gina, because you mentioned earlier about your mum's influence on this and the fact that she was so encouraging. And within the context that you just described, which is most female footballers were having to find other jobs to do alongside football, that actually your mum just said, well, no, if that's what you want to do, you go for it. Just touch on the impact that you think your mum had on you in terms of making those decisions about football, in the early part of your career.
Yeah, my family have played a huge part in my life. I'm extremely lucky in that they're all very supportive in whatever I've wanted to do, and still are to this day. I still ring them if I've come out of a meeting or a really important presentation to talk it through to them, or they're the ones that I go to for advice a lot of the time. And yeah, it can't have been an easy decision for her to let her daughter go at the age of 16 and travel away, knowing she'd only see her a few times of the year. But sort of she's always believed in me, and having that support is really important. So
And how and being, I mean, because again, you mentioned that about being 16 and moving away from home and living 3 hours away and stuff, but I didn't really like fully digest it when you first said it. That's incredibly young to be to not only do that, but to have the kind of clarity of mind and resilience of what it is that you knew that you wanted to do, that you would take that kind of action. Was that fairly unique at the time? Like, you know, girls especially moving those kind of distances to live on their own to join academies?
Yeah, I think reflecting back, it's probably more daunting now to think about it than how I felt at the time. At the time, I was just going away to have the best time of my life, to play football every day, and to have some of the best experiences I could ever have. But the academy setups are fantastic. They're set up to nurture young talent. So you're very well looked after. You're put into host families so that you can integrate, and sort of it's that step between leaving your family and living on your own. And you're living with your teammates. You're around them 24 hours a day. And at that time, it was amazing. And there's nothing I would have changed about it. But I will say that it taught me a lot that set me up for going into the corporate world. Now, you mentioned resilience. I think that is one of the biggest things that sport teaches you. Be it an experience such as moving away from home at a young age, to it taking up such a large portion of your life, to all of those setbacks that you get in sport as well, be it a major injury, be it not being selected for the team. There's a lot of setbacks that you have to overcome, and the resilience that builds is so strong. And that relates to a lot of the work that I do today.
And I love it. You're one of those brilliant podcasting guests who literally responds to my next question, my follow-up question, in your initial response, which is fantastic. So, okay, yeah. So, and it's fascinating. I actually had yesterday, I had a chat from Belgium who was in the Belgium, all in the youth sides of the Belgium field hockey team, and was hoping to go to the Olympics. And unfortunately, just because of the way that the cycles worked, the team that he was trying to get into was very settled and set, and it actually didn't pan out, which was an amazingly significant disappointment for him to deal with, having always viewed himself as ultimately going on to be in elite sport and in professional support. Just talk us through what happens next for you, having, you know, decided to move away from home at 16. Like, what are the next steps and the experiences that you had within football, and when did your professional career kind of kick into play?
Yeah, so for me, it was actually off the back of an injury and that overcoming resilience piece. I suffered an injury, and it gave me a real interest in the importance of nutrition around recovery and also performance as well. It was something that back then perhaps we didn't get so much support with. The literature was very new. Sports science was just starting to creep in. All we really knew was protein shakes. And they thought, that's sports nutrition, here's a protein shake. But I wasn't so convinced. I thought there's got to be more to it. And yeah.
And how old, and so I'm sorry to interrupt you, but how old are you at this point? When did this injury occur? Like,
I was 17 at the time.
Oh, wow. Okay. Still super young.
Yeah, the setup I was in was a high performance college setup to feed into a super league, what it was called at the time, a super league team. And yeah, I just thought there's got to be more to it. Like, I could feel that my body wasn't right, and the food that I was putting into it perhaps played a part. So that's where my interest came from, really, in terms of nutrition and performance, and the impact that food has on our bodies. So I went on to study an undergrad in sports science, masters in nutrition. So I've been qualified as a nutritionist now for 13 years. And then during that time, in my sort of role of a nutritionist, I started in the fitness industry, worked my way into health insurance, but at the same time started to look at the broader impact that food can have. So not just on us as humans, but on the planet as well. And I think that if we're trying to do stuff that's good for us, we've got to be doing stuff at the same time that's good for the planet. And that's really what's evolved into my role that I've currently got today, and working with one of the leading contract caterers. And I'm very proud to say that I've got the role I have, and that I'm working for such an amazing company with real ambition, scale and purpose behind what they're doing.
Gina, that was so beautifully introduced, and I know you've got a number of podcasts coming up, and you're going to be able to introduce yourself and the role and everything that you're doing so beautifully. That was lovely. Let me ask you about so just to sort of, and I love it. You've done the brilliant thing of like really nutshelling together like some really significant different stages in your career, if you like, into something so succinct. And by the way, we'll obviously be sharing links to Gina's LinkedIn profile. So if anyone wants to kind of dive into all the detail and the background, etc., then they'll be able to do so and check things out. But you mentioned there, so we went from so at what point did football sort of was it the injury at 17 that sort of ended the football, the potential for becoming a professional footballer, or how did that fit into the timeline of events?
No, I did return to playing within the academy setup, and then you get to that age of 18 where it's either you've made it, you can stay within the team, or you've got to go on and find your own way. And I was on the cusp, and to be honest, if you know you're not good enough, like you get that feeling. And for me, I knew that I wanted to build a career that would be lasting as well. Football is a risky career. It's a very hard career in terms of getting into it. Very low success rate, but also you're capped at a certain age. You can't play football you can play football into your 50s, 60s, but you're not going to be doing it professionally. So I sort of weighed it up and thought, no, I need to get a career that I can really chase and set my heart on something new. And I think maybe a bit of luck as well, that I sort of stumbled across nutrition and found to be as passionate as I am about football as I am about nutrition. But I actually stopped playing football 2 years ago now. So at the age of 30, made the decision to retire. So I carried on playing, but more at a more casual level.
And and Gina, on that, because I'm fascinated by this, because I mentioned this chap Max that I was speaking to yesterday, and he, I just think and you mentioned resilience, like that whole experience of being a child growing up with this utter devotion and passion and enthusiasm for this experience, and this whole sense of identity that you've got to create about, seeing yourself as an elite sportsman in order to realize that outcome and visualize the outcome of becoming that. The experience of being, you're 18 years old, this is all you've had known. You've had your mum's support that you've alluded to. That's a major thing for you. It shows such a degree of, yes, resilience, but maturity to go, right, I need to think perhaps differently about this. And I need to be honest with myself about kind of where I am. And that, just talk us through that experience of sort of being 18 and making those sorts of decisions. I find it captivating, especially with people that have then gone on to be as successful as you have in the career that you've chosen. What was that like at 18, making that decision for you personally?
Yeah, I'd say it wasn't an easy decision to make, because it wasn't because my enthusiasm for football went away at all. The enthusiasm was there right up until the day I chose to retire. And that is a day I will remember forever. Many tears were shed. And I can feel them coming back now, just thinking about it, to be honest. But I think I've always grown up in a very grounded and honest household. I was always told if I needed to do better, or if I've done well at the same time. And I think just having that, being very level-headed and honest about who you are as a person and what you want to do, has always been sort of one of the key values in my family, honesty. And I think that really helped in making that decision. But at the same time, it was a new experience. It's moving on to something new. You're not leaving behind the past. I wasn't leaving behind football. It was just, what else can I do in my life? So really, I was just like the best of both worlds.
And it's that, and I love that. It's that sense of you're a young person and you're like, okay, what are my other areas of interest and passion? I've got an opportunity here to there's a self-discovery that's going to come from this inquiry. And that was nutrition for you. And then it seems to me, and again, tell me if I'm completely mischaracterizing this, but it's almost like you lent into the next phase of your interest in nutrition. So nutrition to the fitness industry, and then from the fitness industry into the role that you're in now, and ultimately into looking at sustainability. Is that sense of just leaning into the curiosity of the next thing? Is that a good characterization of what you did?
That would summarize it perfectly. That's absolutely it. And I think that can be relevant to everyone. It's about finding what's perhaps sparking that little bit of curiosity that you've got in your current everyday life or the role that you're in, and just going and exploring it. And because we're so fortunate in this world that there are so many different careers and skills and things that we can learn, and that you just got to make the most of it, and you just never know where that path might lead. And you might not enjoy it. Don't get me wrong, it's not all been smooth sailing, and every path I've gone down I thought this is fantastic. And there are also those ones where you think, not sure if this is for me, but you've always got that thing that you can go back to.
And on that, and I think that's a great piece of advice for, we're going to come on and talk magic wands and things, but you've already given out some executive coaching there, Gina, so thank you for that. I want to talk to you about ESG and sustainability more broadly. You brilliantly described how, you kind of, I guess, came into through perhaps more of an S focus. You're working with people, working with nutrition, etc. But then, and with food. But then there was this sense of, okay, now I'm looking at the wider, broader impact of food from an environmental perspective. Just talk me through like what it's like for you being ahead of ESG, ahead of sustainability. Like what's the role like day to day, and how does it make you feel to be working in the space?
Do you know what? It's a question that I'm asked so often, sort of what does your day to day look like? And I still don't have an answer to that question. Over 3 years into my role, I'm still not sure what the day to day entails, because every day is so different. Mm-hmm. ESG is such a broad area, and more just keeps finding its way into it, to be honest with you. I think we need to stop at where we are for now. But I'd say it's one that's very busy, always changing, very hard to sort of predict what's going to happen next. I think that's what really excites me about it, is that you never know what's around the corner, and that you have to be very fast to adapt, and you have to be resilient to these sort of changes. So for me, in my role at Aramark, in head of ESG, for me, it's all about how we look at our strategy as a business, and sort of pinpoint the areas in where we can have a positive impact on people and reduce our impact on the planet. Like I said, ESG is such a broad subject that we can get lost down so many different rabbit holes if we were to try and tackle every different aspect that it covers. But for me, it's all about what can we as a business and as individuals really make a positive impact on if we focus on one or two things and do them really well.
And let me ask you, you mentioned that you've been with Aramark and in the role for 3 years. And you've just described there, I think brilliantly, like almost the pragmatism that has to come with sustainability within a corporate context. Like, how's it going? Like, what's the overall kind of report card for both the company and for yourself, do you feel, when you look at the impact of your work?
I think it's really exciting. I'm very fortunate in my role at Aramark that they are a forward-thinking company. And I say they're very ambitious. Everything is done with a purpose. And I think one thing that I value probably the most in our business is the buy-in already to ESG. Like, a lot of sustainability professionals you work with talk about how they're trying to engage the board and how they're going to get buy-in to certain initiatives. But I can honestly sit here and say that that's not an issue I've had to try and overcome at Aramark, from the presidential level through all the way to our team members. Everyone is open. Their ears are open to sustainability. And it's something that the president has been very clear in her messaging around as well, in sort of our purpose in this area. And that makes any sustainability person's job much easier when it's coming from the top. But at the same time, it's so well integrated into our communications and what we deliver as a business through our food. Like I say, I feel very comfortable that all of our team can speak to it very well, or at least are willing to learn and get with us on the journey. So I do know and understand that I'm in a very privileged position compared to other sustainability leaders that are out there.
That's super interesting. And I have to say, rings so true to, like, we've had like shows specifically talking about like, how do you get people to listen? And not only how do you get people to listen, but how do you get people to the point of making difficult decisions and essentially the longer term commercial consideration of implementing something from a sustainability perspective, as opposed to direct short-term profit maximization perspective, which is when really boils down to it, like, those are the difficult decisions. And I think that you can, if you ask organizations, and again, I might pose this to you and we feel free to give me the forward defensive, but like, have there been decisions that you guys have made, do you feel, where you've gone, do you know what, we're going to forego the short-term profit maximization of X in order to make the sustainable choice, which we know is right for the business and everyone else longer term? Has that happened in your role?
There have been times where sustainability comes at a cost, of course. But at the same time, what I've found really valuable is how we look at sustainability and how it can be profitable as well. And of course, the decisions are never easy when talking to the board about sustainability and how it's going to have, or how we need funding for it, for example. However, by having that sort of thorough understanding at a board level of sustainability, why it's important to our business, why it's important for business resilience, for us as a food service company, protecting our supply chain, which is obviously very vulnerable to environmental disruptions. Once they understand that, of course, they're much more willing to engage in these conversations. But so for me, it's about, whilst you're trying to sort of fund initiatives that might be a little bit more costly with sustainability, how can we look at it to try and find those areas where actually we can maximize profitability, particularly through things like waste reduction, or perhaps by reducing the use of disposables, those sort of things. So it's a bit of a balancing act, I find, always works quite well.
But again, comes back to that need for the communication that, you know, you've obviously worked on and looked to sort of perfect yourself within you and your team to be able to communicate these things to people that ultimately might be coming at it from a purely commercial perspective. But once they understand the commerciality of sustainability, they get it. And then ultimately it becomes easier to convince them to apportion budgets, etc. Is that a fair?
Yeah, absolutely. Communication is key. And it's all about getting the right people talking to the right people. So, for example, the best example for us in our business was introducing a culinary lead for People and Planet. He was already in a position in the business that was very well respected. He was a senior culinary director. We restructured the food platform that we currently have in place in Aramark and created a role for culinary lead for Planet and People. So looking after our food platform in the way of sort of sustainability, health, well-being, those sort of things. And what we found really interesting was how well other chefs engage now in sustainability when the message is being driven by someone who was already sort of in the business, very highly respected, and of the same career. So we found that chefs like to learn from chefs, not so receptible perhaps to someone who sits in a corporate team in their office all day, going into the kitchen to tell them to take more beef out of their menus. So I think this is just a really good example of how it's important to have the right people talking to the right people and communicating that message. And that can be spread across the board of a business.
God, Gina, that's so brilliant and nuanced. Like, yeah, it's not just about the right message, it's about the right people delivering that message. I think that's a fantastic insight. The work that you guys do at Aramark. I want to ask you one more question, slightly jumping sort of to the side slightly on you and thinking about you. Now, you're still at the early stages of your career, so I want you to get your crystal ball out here. And I want you to think about the rest of your career from this point onwards. When you get to the end of your career and you're looking back, what would success look like?
Goodness, you've started with a nice, easy question there, haven't you, John?
I've lulled you into a false sense of security. Now I've gone for the hard hitting one at the end. I'm just fascinated. I think when I look at you and I look at the things that you've done and how quickly you've progressed and developed in your roles, etc. I do just think it's fascinating just to ask, what's the end game here? Like, what does success look like for you personally in terms of the impact that you can have?
Yeah, do you know what? For me, it probably goes outside of the environmental role that I'm in right now, and it would come back to more to the people. For me, I would have a really a sense of fulfillment from having had a positive impact on other people's career, and seeing other people flourish in their roles as well. If I can look back and see someone sort of at the early stages of their career that I've been able to support getting into a job, and having such an amazing time as I am, then that will make me very happy.
I love that. Gina, fantastic. Well, look, we've done 25 minutes or so on you. I could ask you so many more questions. We haven't even talked about who you support or what you thought of Inter Milan versus Barcelona last night, which, by the way, we're recording the morning after the absolute sensational 7-6 aggregate score, I think it was, for the Champions League semi-final. But we can have that. We can talk about that another time, Gina. Let's move on now, if possible, to and apologies for our authors who always get an absolute butchering with me and names. But I think it was Noor Imran et al. Is what I'm calling it, in Science Direct from September 2024. This was actually a full research piece. So sorry, Gina, for giving you such a lengthy document to go through. But could you just start by giving our listeners and viewers like a bit of a summary of what was included within the research, and then perhaps just picking out for you what you found to be the most interesting sort of observations and insights from it?
No need to apologise at all for the extra reading. It was actually a really insightful read, and I'd recommend any of your listeners to go away and have a read of this article, because it was very well written and lots to take away from it. But in essence, they looked at the impact of carbon labelling, which is where we assign a carbon scoring, perhaps on a rating of A to E, perhaps on a numerical score of an item. In this case, they used sandwiches, to then inform customers on the environmental impact of the product that they're consuming. So they were looking at things like consumer awareness, how important they perceived the labels to be, their understanding of the import of the labels, and whether it actually initiated any behaviour change. So did displaying a carbon label on this sandwich influence their decision to perhaps choose a lower carbon item sandwich?
And everyone's going to be tantalizingly sort of questioning them with themselves as you've described that, which was beautifully done, I have to say. And Gina mentioned that we'll be obviously linking to the source research piece, so you guys can go and check it out and read the certainly the abstract, and if not the whole piece. But what was the outcome, Gina? What did we find in the research?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of research going on in this space already to look at, does it influence behaviour change or not? What we're seeing is that perhaps at the moment, the impact on initiating behaviour change isn't that significant. People are saying that it might influence their decision. However, other factors are coming in more strongly. So, for example, particularly in the time that we're in at the moment, the cost always normally comes out as number one driver around the quality of the product, and then things like sustainability start to creep in. However, it's not all bad news, because they did dig a little bit deeper into sort of why aren't these labels perhaps generating that behaviour change. And that's the bit that's really interesting to us and resonates to what we're doing at Aramark, because we introduced carbon labelling into our business around 2.5 years ago now, actually, using Foodprint by Nutritics. And I think we entered it a little bit like, this is going to have a significant impact on our carbon emissions. We're going to be informing our customers on what are the more sustainable options on our menu, and they're going to go for those options. Wasn't that easy. So yeah, in this paper, they looked a bit deeper into, okay, so what else do we need to do to sort of try and increase the influence that these labels are having? And they started to look at things like actually people's understanding of these labels. And what they started to find was that a really high percentage of people didn't actually understand what these labels were telling them. And so, of course, it's not going to influence their decision. So that education piece is really key to sit alongside this. Again, we don't have the answers just yet, because I think if you imagine your sandwich packaging, you've already got your calorie information, your nutritional information, your allergens on the back. We're now going to put carbon information on there, and we're also going to educate you about that as well. Like, this packaging is just going to get bigger and bigger. And it then becomes information overload to the customer.
And how, because I think just to throw a few like figures on it, because by the way, I think that was brilliantly described, but I think it was like, and again, I might be getting this wrong, but I think it was like 69% of consumers were found to have valued or placed value on carbon labels, but only, I think it was 27% let it actually influence their choices. Now that's a mega gap, isn't it? That in the action gap, I think you referred to it. And I appreciate that you're suggesting that there's resolutions to this, but I found that to be, I mean, I'll be honest with you, when I read it, I wasn't totally surprised by it, because I mean, I think it is one of those things you've already alluded to, other kind of key decision-making factors that go into why we choose one product over another. And the fundamental reality is that there are just other things that are more pressing and more immediate to all of us than concerning ourselves with perhaps the carbon or the environmental impact of the product that we're engaging with. Like, when you think about the way that if you're somebody considering carbon labeling as sort of borne out in this study, and you're then confronted with those sorts of statistics, what's the pitch that you would make, Gina, to that business to say, no, it is worth investing in, it is worth doing this?
Yeah, I think for us, I absolutely agree. There's a huge gap between intention and behaviour with the consumer, and we do need to try and tackle that, whether it's done sort of on a business level or whether it's through something like a government intervention where this sort of thing becomes regulated. If we think back to calories being introduced, the traffic light labelling, etc., when something becomes regulation, it becomes more apparent, and it really does help to increase awareness. So perhaps there's some work to be done there, but for us as a business, actually introducing carbon labelling really empowered us behind the scenes in the work that we're doing. So for us, it's great that we can inform those customers who want to be informed. We have carbon labelling available there, but actually behind the scenes, it's all integrated into our food management system. So every time a chef creates a recipe, within an hour, we'll have all of the nutritional information, but we'll also have a carbon label assigned to that recipe. So we're then able to look at that recipe, identify sort of what ingredients in that recipe are really contributing to that footprint, and look at how we can then reformulate that recipe to reduce the overall score. So that's where we're seeing it have real impact, and our culinary team are working really hard to look at our top contributing dishes to our sort of emissions through the food that we're selling, which no surprise are coming in through things like your burgers, your lasagnas, your chilies, your sausages, etc. And looking at how we can reformulate them to actually lower their impact at the source, rather than relying on the customer to make a decision to have a lower carbon dish.
That is awesome. I had a show with a lady from Bite Back, which is an initiative looking at like youth engagement in food, essentially. And she was talking, about how a lot of the big players in food have essentially sort of turned the narrative on the customer, and it being their responsibility to make the healthy, sustainable choice, etc. But actually, therefore, foregoing the responsibility that they have as a food player to provide the opportunities for the easy opportunity for the correct decisions to be made by the customer. And I think what you've just described like nails that. I also love how from the carbon labeling perspective, if I again regurgitate what you're saying in any particular sense. It's the idea that it starts as an internal tool, and yes, at the moment from an external customer perspective, it might not be the highest sort of level of concern. It's still good practice to have it there, and it's not an overstretch to say, well, we're utilizing this internally, why wouldn't we share it externally as well? On that point, Gina, again, I want you to get your crystal ball out here, so feel free to caveat as such. But do you see that as education around carbon and the understanding of the implications from an environmental perspective of the production of a product, do you see it getting more and more important to the customer over the next 5, 10, 15 years? Do you think if this study was conducted again in those kind of timescales, we would see a difference?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't have any other answer to that than that I do think it does. I think it's the same with any sort of, as our awareness and understanding increases in any subject, that's just how it becomes. We've seen the same transformation in nutrition over the past 10, 15 years. And I think sustainability is going to follow the same trajectory as that. And
do you, and what influence, I mean, obviously we're living in a world now. I'm just thinking about like the most recent like blackouts that we saw in Portugal and Spain. We've had the floods in Valencia last year. We've had the wildfires in LA. Like, do you think that those are the, I mean, unfortunate, but ultimately the stimulus for us as a general population to be more and more aware of how our purchasing decisions affect the world around us? Is that what's happening? And your key driver. Yeah, I feel like unfortunately we do often leave it till it's a little bit too late before we try to initiate a change, and that's just generally across the board. But yes, sometimes it does take sort of a big disruption or something bad to happen before people think, right, I need to make a change. And from my experience working in healthcare and the nutrition side of things, it's very relevant to that. Often when working with people and their health, people will wait until something bad happens before they put an intervention in place. And that's exactly what we're seeing with sustainability. I think the wildfires, the blackouts, flooding, etc., becoming more prevalent is going to make people understand that this is real. We need to do something about it, guys, if we want to protect the planet, but also protect things like our supply chain and the things that we have access to. And I suppose then it comes back to your point about education, because what we need to be able to tie together for the customer, looking down at my sandwich and seeing that, this is a fairly sustainable, product choice that I can make, and then aligning that with those big ticket media items that have affected me and made me think about my behaviors, etc. as well. Just talk us through what you guys are doing. I know you've got, is it the Green Academy? Just talk us through kind of what role that's playing, because I think that is related, isn't it, to this educational piece that we're talking about? Yeah, we've got so much stuff going on, Charlie. It's super exciting. And like you say, particularly in that education area. So yeah, you've seen on our LinkedIn, our socials, etc., the launch of Green Academy. Green Academy is a training program for our culinary teams. We take a cohort of individuals, and it's a 6-session training program focusing on lots of different elements of sustainable nutrition. And that's not just environmental sustainability, it's health sustainability as well. Each session they'll focus on something different. And I think the first session is focusing around things like using the whole ingredient. The second session was on health. So we went into things like gut health, longevity, fiber, lots of different topics that are very important. It's a 6-stage program, and at the end of it, they'll graduate from the Green Academy, and they'll learn lots of new skills that they can apply to their everyday cooking, but also to their everyday lives as well, and that they can take back to their units, to their clients, to their customers, to share their learnings. And it's going fantastically. And that's the Green Academy that focuses on our culinary teams. But obviously there are so many other teams within our business that sit outside of culinary. So alongside that, we launched the Planet Ambassador Program. And this program is about taking anyone in the business. So it can be HR. We've got business development teams that have come on it.
We've got our frontline teams, we've got central teams, our supply chain. Anyone can come to a Planet Ambassador Day and they will learn about what we're doing as a business around sustainability. We host them at some of our sites, so we'll usually take them to an agricultural college. So they'll get to see some forms of regenerative farming or some sort of local growing that then goes into our food. And yeah, they get a great day out, but also learn how they can apply those things to their everyday, both in the workplace, so what they can do to help us as a business, what they can do outside that as well. And when we first launched it, we thought we might get a few people signed up. We had over 200 people from around the business put their name down to go on these programs. So we host 4 of those sessions a year. They're great fun. And then we're looking to evolve that and now looking at how can we take it to schools to provide it as an educational program. How can we get our clients to those sessions as well?
And I love that. I mean, that what I particularly love about that is the fact that you're running those sessions, as you say, on farms to give people that sensory experience that is, again, a theme that has come up on the show a lot, that actually it's when people smell and touch and can really essentially experience things in that sensory way that actually that can have the biggest impact upon behavior and mindset and the way that they view things. So it's fantastic to hear that. One question, you mentioned a number of different initiatives focused on internal training of staff and other key kind of internal stakeholders. What about, and again, the article talks about the need or the call to arms for more stronger education for customers. What do you guys do on that front? Do you do anything specifically designed to educate the customer?
Yeah, so sitting alongside our carbon labelling, if you were to go into one of our units, you'd either see carbon labelling displayed on the items or on a QR code, which you could then scan and see the carbon label for each of your dishes. It's also accompanied by a link or a QR code to more information on our website, where you can understand how that carbon label is generated, what impact the decision that you're making is having, and information around why you should make a lower carbon choice. We've also got other marketing materials available in our outlets as well, which will guide people towards making that choice. So we've got things like A of the day. So the carbon labelling system we use is very similar to your white household good energy ratings, rates it on a scale of A to E, which interestingly in this article, actually, they mentioned that those are the ones that have a higher success rate with customers when we're using systems that we're familiar with. So that's very reassuring. And that's part of the reason that we did go with Nutritics Foodprint, is because we saw that sort of familiarity. But yeah, so we'll make call outs to this is your A of the day dish, or this is the sort of low carbon dish of the day, to try and influence people to go towards that. One thing that we did create, which is great fun, and a bit of a throwback to a game you might be familiar with called Higher or Lower. Play your cards right. But we changed it to Play Your Carbon Right. And it's one of those very similar. I should have bought it. We could have played it live on air.
Next show.
We'll do that as a little tag on. But the idea is that you have the name of the dish one side, and you have to guess whether the next dish is higher or lower in carbon than the previous dish. And it worked really well in our education sites, getting people engaging with it. And sort of getting that understanding. We're able to talk to the customers about the reason why one dish is perhaps higher in carbon than another. But we actually took it into some of our workplace settings, and it went down just as well. Our customers love it, that engaging piece, just having a little bit of fun, but at the same time delivering a really responsible message.
I love that, lightening everything a little bit, and Gina, as you can see, we absolutely butchered our timings, and you know that my producers will be knocking at me for this. But I've got more questions, so I will ask them. I want to ask it and I hope it lands in the right way. But we've had lots of conversations about the brilliant stuff that Aramark are doing, and obviously the stuff that you're leading on, and it really does. And I mentioned to you, my researcher before this particular show was like blown away when looking at kind of what you guys have done, and you've explained things so beautifully. Now, playing slight devil's advocate, no organization is truly sustainable. So with that in mind, just talk us through the areas of, or the opportunities, if you like, for Aramark, and perhaps even just more broadly, like the food services sector. It'd be interesting to get your take on that. Like, what are the big opportunities? What are the big areas that where development is required and the things that you're focusing on?
Of course. I think for us, it's the food that we purchase and we serve. So to give you a bit of a background, this would be very similar for all contract caterers. Around 97-98% of our emissions sit in scope 3. Makes it very hard to track and manage, and feel confident you've got strong data in that area. But breaking it down further, around sort of the 70% mark of our emissions is coming from the food that we purchase and that we serve. So that is clearly the biggest opportunity for us there. No surprise as well that the majority of that is coming from animal products, so anything from beef ranging through to our dairy. So for me, it's looking at how we can be much more responsible in that space, how we can reduce our meat purchasing at the same time as maintaining high customer satisfaction, of course. And we've proved that it can be done through some of our menu development that we've already done, where we're testing sort of a 100% meat-based product against a blended product, and the satisfaction is quite fantastically. So we know the scope is there, but of course, you've got to balance things like the profitability of those dishes as well, which isn't always easy. I also think there's a big responsibility for the food service industry. You think about how many meals are served across the UK every day. Aramark alone, we serve over 250,000 meals a day in the UK. We're a US business, scale that up globally, and that's absolutely huge in the impact that we can have, or that we are having. And whilst that sort of opportunity is there, of course, it highlights the impact that we are having and that we need to do something about. So I think it's that food purchasing piece and looking at what we're doing with our actual food, but then it's also how we can support responsible farming, regenerative farming, biodiversity, etc. Because we are big players in this industry. There are things that we can be doing, whether it's, like you say, it goes back to education so many times, but how can we support perhaps those SMEs in the education area to help them to be more responsible with their business as well? I think that's the responsibility that bigger players in this industry have, and the opportunities lie.
And and that then becomes the ultimate win-win situation, whereby from Aramark's perspective, it helps you reduce your scope 3 emissions, but also it helps those individual players that are within your supply and value chain to ultimately improve themselves along the way. So it's the perfect mix. I'm going to conclude now with the magic wand question. I'm fascinated to hear what you're going to do with this, having had the conversation that we've had. If I was to hand you a magic wand and you've changed one thing about the commercial world this instant, what would that one thing be?
I would say to have ESG underpinning any decisions that we're making in some way, shape or form. So for it to always just be a natural consideration when decisions are being made.
You're going to get a hear, because I give out hears to guests that I think have absolutely nailed it. That is a very, very sensible, well considered suggestion. Does that at Aramark, is that just part of the culture now? Is that ingrained that ESG is when decisions are made, strategic decisions are made, it just is immediately factored in? Is that part of the enjoyment that you have of your role within the company?
Yeah, I'd say so. It's a journey, and we're still on that journey. But the progress that we've made is amazing. I'm very much looking forward to what we've got ahead of us as well.
Excellent stuff. Well, Gina, we're looking forward to following closely here at The Responsible Edge. And I have to say that was an absolute delight having you on the show. Really open and interesting conversation. So thank you for sharing what you did with us today. It was brilliant.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been great.
And that's all for this episode of The Responsible Edge. A big thank you to Gina Camfield, Head of ESG at Aramark UK, for joining me. Today, we unpack the role of carbon labelling, the psychology of food choices, and what it takes to turn awareness into action. Gina reminded us that the journey to sustainable food systems isn't just about what's on the label, it's about the systems, stories, and support that surround it. As a reminder, this episode was brought to you by the Anti-Greenwash Charter, championing responsible sustainability communications. Visit antigreenwashcharter.com to learn more. I'm Charlie Martin, thanks for listening, and don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave us a review. Until next time, stay responsible.